Well, it is here. 1.4 has finally arrived, bringing with it new game modes, new quests, and of course, the rerun of two fantastic characters. But, alongside this, we've been introduced to a suite of new weapons, each rather unique and one that is rather questionable. On paper, some of these weapons sound rather good, and could potentially be new best-in-slot options, but that is where the question arises. How good are these new weapons? What value do they have? And most importantly, are they worth your hard-earned Primo Gems? Well, good day to you all, you based bluefins. I am the Immersive Fish, and today, using some basic theory crafting and math, I will answer exactly that on this episode of Fish's Guide to Genshin. I'm gonna kick this off with the main weapon that most people are probably here to find out about, the Elegy for the End. On paper, this weapon sounds like it could be rather strong, and its insanely long text and pretty solid effect certainly contributes to that. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's break down the weapon a little bit because the effect looks like it was written by Fischl herself. At level 1, the weapon has a base attack of 46 and a substat of energy recharge, starting at plus 12%. As you continue to level the weapon up, these stats will of course improve, eventually totaling 608 base attack and 55.1% energy recharge. At refinement rank 1, the Elegy actually has one of the weaker static passives of the entire 5-star lineup, giving its user 60 elemental mastery. And now it's time to get into the bulk of the effect. I've taken the liberty of simplifying things so that you can actually understand what the Elegy does. Basically, when you use an elemental skill or burst, each tick of damage that they deal will gain you a stack every 0.2 seconds. When 4 stacks are reached, every member of the party will have their attack increased by 20% and their elemental mastery by 100 for 12 seconds. Following this buff being procced, there is a 20-second interval where you can't gain stacks anymore. If you do decide to push for higher refinements, these stats will of course get even better, meaning at refinement rank 5, the character who has the bow equipped will gain 120 elemental mastery, and the buff will give a 40% attack boost and 200 elemental mastery. Unlike, say, the Staff of Homer, this weapon is actually pretty straightforward once you take away all the fluff from its description. It allows its user to gain their ult faster, increases their reactionary damage, and increases the total party damage output for a short period of time. So with all of those stats out of the way, how good actually is it? Well, this is where I really come in and burst the bubble around the Elegy for the End. It really isn't that great, especially when ran on Venti despite it supposedly being his signature weapon. Elegy itself is designed as a supportive weapon, and as such it does trade off damage, which is fine. There should be a cost of offense for more supportive weapons. The issue is, Venti's ult actually does really solid damage, and changing across from say a stringless, you are going to notice a pretty significant DPS falloff. Further, Venti's ult snapshots, meaning the damage output of the ultimate only considers what stats you have at the time of cast. In other words, Venti himself doesn't benefit from the Elegy buff. Following on from that, Venti also really doesn't need more than 150% energy recharge, due to his A4 giving him back 15 energy from casting his ult, and his ER being an Ascension stat. This more or less means that if you have an artifact with an ER substat of say 10, or a couple of artifacts with just ER that doesn't even get rolled into, you're not going to need anything extra, and you'll be ulting off cooldown, thus making Elegy's substat kind of redundant. Following on from that, none of the cooldowns of Elegy line up with Venti's ult rotation, such that he never benefits from the weapon's buff. Yeah. We've already established that Venti's ult snapshots, meaning when the buff is first applied, he won't benefit from it, and his ult cooldown is longer than 12 seconds, which is the duration the buff lasts. This is then followed by the fact the Elegy buff has a 20-second cooldown, and that also doesn't align with Venti's 15-second ult cooldown. This basically means that in an endgame scenario, if you don't clear, say, an abyss floor or a domain in Venti's first ult rotation, it's going to become harder and harder to activate the Elegy buff. Basically, the ult rotation of Venti and the cooldown of the bow continue to further and further out of sync the more you use them. So if Venti's signature weapon isn't great for him, who is it good on? Well, based on everything I've discussed with other theory crafters and the testing I've done myself, we all pretty much agree that the weapon has its value in super high investment whale comps focused on speedrunning. This is mainly done by running Amber as a pyro enabler to do super high damage with a Mona or Tartaglia ult. In other words, this weapon is not worth summoning unless you are the ultimate hyper-invest whale team person and you just want to see like slightly bigger numbers. In pretty much any other circumstance, it's just not worth it. That also is then followed by the fact this weapon banner isn't great either. Skyward Blade isn't bad by any means, and it's a very solid option for Bennett, but it's just not a very good banner, and as such, if you were considering summoning for this weapon, I would highly advise otherwise. Hi, it's Fish from the future. I just need to quickly correct something that I said earlier. Mihoyo changed it only a couple of days after I, did the script up and stuff like that, but EM no longer snapshots for swirls. So, Venti benefits from the first half of the Elegy passive now, which is pretty nice. Still doesn't make it worth it in my eyes. Secondly, I've been testing with some turbo comps, and in the OG CN meta comp, Zhang Ling, Bennett, Xingqiu, and Fischl. If you have a C6 Fischl, Elegy is actually pretty good on her. It amplifies the Zhang Ling's damage quite a lot, and obviously Bennett gets a lot out of it. So yeah, Elegy can be pretty good if it's in the right circumstances. Still though, in my eyes, very much not worth the possible thousands of dollars you would have to put in for it. So, final thoughts on the weapon are pretty much unchanged. I don't think it's really worth it. Well, on that rather depressing note, let's move on to the new 4-star weapons. I'm going to start off with probably the most interesting of them, Wine and Song. At level 1, this book has 44 base attack and a substat of energy recharge, sitting at plus 6.7%. If you take the weapon all the way through to level 90, its base attack jumps all the way to 565, and energy recharge to plus 30.6%. A Refine 1. If you hit an enemy with a normal attack, the cost of dashing and sprinting is reduced by 14%, and dashing or sprinting increases attack damage by 20%. Further, pushing it through to Refine 5 increases the sprint cost reduction to 22% and the attack gain to 40%. This weapon is pretty solid all around, providing easier access to character ults while allowing for freedom of movement on generally more stationary and immobile characters. That being said, it is pretty clear this weapon is designed around DPS Mona. That energy recharge substat allows Mona to ult off cooldown more consistently and increases her damage through both the effect and increased hydro damage bonus scaling from energy recharge. Basically, DPS Mona has a new 4-star best in slot, dealing 8% more damage for the N4, 20% more damage on charge attacks, and 19% more damage on the ult when compared to the Solar Pearl, Mona's previous best in slot option for 4-star DPS. This is pretty impressive, especially when considering when compared to a Skyward Atlas build with a slightly lower crit damage, Wine sits within a 10% margin for normal and charged, and within margin of error for ult damage. So, conclusions for Wine and Song? For most Catalyst users, it's a great alternative to the more damage-focused options, providing consistent damage and mobility at the cost of overall damage ceiling, while for a more DPS-oriented Mona, it's pretty much just the budget edition Skyward Atlas. With Wine out of the way, let's get into the Alley Flash. Stat-wise, this weapon is really impressive. At level 1, it has a base attack of 45 and an elemental mastery of 12 as the substat. The impressive part of this is when it's leveled up. The weapon scales exponentially, giving 620 base attack and 55 elemental mastery. Further, its effect isn't half bad either, increasing attack by 12% at refinement 1, and the effect being disabled for 5 seconds if the character that has the weapon equipped takes damage. Finally, when the weapon is taken up to refinement rank 5, it ends up giving a pretty solid 25% attack buff. This weapon has the second highest base attack of any straight sword in the game, only being beaten by the Aquila Favonia. So what does this mean? Well, first and most importantly, this is a support Bennett's new best in slot 4-star pick. No questions asked. With the insanely high base attack, it actually gives an attack boost higher than his current best in slot, the Skyward Blade. Overall, I still think Skyward is a better option purely due to the fact Bennett makes a bit better use of energy recharge than Elemental Mastery, but Ali does allow him to get more ult damage, so if you want a bit more inconsistent, but overall a higher damage boost and better damage all round, Ali Flash is extremely solid. Outside of Bennett though, the weapon is oriented towards off-field damage and reactionary supports, meaning while there are better options available, Flash is pretty solid for Kaya and the Traveler. Finally, due to their healing scaling off of attack, having lots of it is very good, thus meaning Ali is pretty solid for both Jean and Chi-Chi. Finishing this all off, we have the weapon I am most looking forward to of them all, the Ali Hunter. While yes, it isn't out yet, it will be available on the next weapon banner, so it is still worth discussing. Main reasons for this is the weapon is really strong. The weapon itself is running double attack stats, such that at level 1, the weapon has 44 base attack and 6% attack. Taking it all the way through to level 90 will increase these values to 565 and 27.6% respectively. Pretty solid so far, but what about the effect? Well, this is where it really starts to shine. At refinement rank 1, every second the character that has this bow equipped is not on field, their damage increases by 2%, capping at 20%. If said character is on field for more than 4 seconds, this damage buff will be drained at 4% until it reaches 0. This, of course, improves with refinements, eventually capping at R5, giving 4% damage per second off field, capping at 40% with a drain increasing to 8%. So, why is this weapon good? Well, the Ali Hunter's effect is an example of multiplicative damage, directly increasing the output damage rather than increasing your attack stat. Basically, it just multiplies your damage by a pretty significant chunk by just having your character off field. With that said, this is obviously going to be support Fischl's new best in slot option. She's never on field longer than 4 seconds, and as such will permanently benefit from the increased damage. Outside of Fischl, this weapon is still going to be a better option for Venti than the Elegy is, which is kinda depressing. You could also make a case for Hunter on Diona if you wanted to increase her damage output, but you do lose out on the utility that running Sacrificial Bow provides, and as such I personally wouldn't recommend it. With all of that said, time to wrap things up. TLDR, Elegy just isn't worth it unless you're a Hyper Whale, and in my opinion, it's one of the worst 5-star weapons we've ever gotten. Its effect is pretty solid in speedrunning teams, however the vast majority of the community is not at a point where something like this is viable to invest into. On the 4-star front, each of them has a clearly defined role, and are very good in those roles. Wine and Song is a fantastic utility pick for most Catalyst users, providing a solid amount of energy recharge while enabling more movement, and further, on a DPS mono, this weapon surprised me quite a bit, especially being a poor man's Skyward Atlas. The Ali Flash is awesome. It finally enables a free-to-play Bennett to access an attack boost of greater than 1000, and having an extremely high base attack means any characters which scale off attack will benefit quite a lot. Finally, Ali Hunter is great for Fischl specifically and has great potential for future off-field damage supports. It's also a great alternative to Stringless or Viridescent Hunt for Venti. Hopefully this has helped out a little bit. I know that there's been quite a lot of things said about Elegy specifically, and I wanted to provide a rundown on the performance of the new weapons to assist you all in deciding whether you want to summon or not. As always, I hope you've enjoyed the video as well, and if you have any questions or want something answered in a little bit more depth, the best place for it is the Zhongli Mains Discord. I spend most of my time chatting there with the community, and whenever I get the chance, it's generally the place you'll catch me outside of the comments section. Again, I really must thank you all so much for the support of the channel. It's been absolutely nuts, and I seriously must extend the thanks to all of you. With that being said though, if you did enjoy the video, maybe consider subscribing. We're getting pretty close to 200, and the goal is 1k by the end of the year, so if you want to see more realistic Genshin math content, this is the place for it. With all of that said, I do genuinely hope you've enjoyed, and until next time, make sure you all take it easy.